Hello, everyone. I'm Justin Silverman of the New England First Amendment Coalition. Thank you for joining us for another 30-minute skills. For those here for the first time, welcome. These monthly lessons are a quick and efficient way to hone your reporting skills and build on your First Amendment knowledge. But they're also more than that. As those who join us every month already know, these lessons are a way for you to reconnect with a community of journalists, researchers, attorneys, and academic. So to everyone, please use the chat to introduce yourself, showcase your own work, and connect with others. Also, make sure you register for our upcoming lessons on networking and vibe coding, among many other classes. Registration links and all previous lessons can be found at nefac.org/30minuteskills. Today's presentation is focused on how to begin your own podcast. It's supported in part by the estate of Gloria L. Negri. Gloria was a trailblazing journalist at the Boston Globe for more than 50 years. This program is part of her legacy of newsroom education and her lifelong commitment to local journalism. You can learn more about Gloria and other NEFAC supporters at nefac.org/supporters. During today's presentation, I again encourage you to introduce yourself in the chat and share your own experiences and resources. You can also use the chat or the Q&A button to ask questions of our instructors, and we'll get to as many of those questions as possible. We have a lot to cover and not a lot of time, so let's get started. Megan and Ed, all yours.
Hey everyone, my name's Ed Fitzpatrick. I'm a reporter at the Boston Globe here in Rhode Island. I'm the host of the Rhode Island Report podcast, and I've been a member of the NEFAC board for about 10 years.
And I'm Megan Hall. I'm the producer of Rhode Island Report. I also host a podcast called Possibly that airs on public stations around the country. And I teach a podcasting class at Brown University.
So thank you for joining us for this 30-minute skills course. So we're going to begin by just telling you a bit about the Rhode Island Report podcast. And we want to explain why it's probably something that you can do too in your newsroom. The Rhode Island Report is a podcast that comes out every week from the Boston Globe on what's news and what's interesting in Rhode Island. We do in-depth interviews with newsmakers. We provide perspective and analysis from Globe Rhode Island reporters and outside experts. And we try to break news and make news, create some buzz, for example, about a state Senate leadership battle or a contested mayoral race. And, I want to emphasize this not in addition to covering the news. We see this as a way of covering the beat, breaking news, and covering the news. Sometimes we get out of the studio and we do some fun stories. For example, we went to an electromagnetic pinball museum in Pawtucket one day, and we've also gone for a run with a guy who ran every street in the city of Providence, beginning from the same spot.
This is our 243rd episode to come out this week, so we've been at it for a while. We've been working together for about 4.5 years, and we've also won some awards. So in 2023 and 2024, we got the best podcast from the New England Newspaper and Press Association, and we're hoping for a three-peat this year.
So it's not a highly produced podcast that involves interviews with dozens of people or the sound of loons that take months to produce it and a lot of fancy touches. It's a news interview podcast that people tune into because they want to hear about a hot topic in the news, breaking news, an interview with a fascinating person, or a breakdown of election results that week, and or just something intriguing. Actually, our most popular episode was an interview with a dialect coach who explained how to talk like a Rhode Islander. In other words, how to talk like me, why I talk like this. And he even taught Megan how to talk like a Rhode Island.
Yeah, he gave me a little lesson right on the spot, which was really fun. And then we had recordings of Rhode Islanders who called in giving examples of their accents. So that was a great way to crowdsource some material and get people involved. But the process is pretty streamlined. This is a photo of our studio where we're sitting right now. That's Ed checking up on the news. And you can see it's really pretty simple. We have 3 microphones and they're plugged into my computer just to let you kind of take a look. The mic we use is called a Rode Procaster, and it has a little filter on it for P-pops. And then all of those are plugged into what's called a Scarlett Focusrite, and that box plugs into my computer so the audio can go in.
And we've got a potted plant. That's key part of it. So to give you an idea how this works, we want to take you through each step of the process. The first step, of course, is just coming up with a good idea, finding a newsworthy topic or individual, and then book that guest, make sure they can do it, confirm, get them the information about when to be here, what to expect. And then I start a prep doc, a Google Doc, and share it with Megan with the questions I plan to ask. And she adds some questions. And, I might deviate from that script a bit if I hear someone say something interesting or unexpected, just like you would do with any normal interview. This is an example of on the screen is the prep doc for our interview with the Rhode Island Attorney General Peter Nerona on September 18th. So, a bit of his background, the introduction, and then you'll see the first questions are crossed out. Megan can explain why we crossed that out.
So we asked him some topical questions because we thought they might be useful even before the podcast was released, that Ed could use in a tweet or an article, but he didn't really say anything interesting. So we said, let's just cut that and go straight to the question where, he actually says something interesting. So you'll see we crossed those out. And then here's some of the questions that we asked after that. You'll also notice that there's a little highlight. I write notes to Ed during the process, mostly just telling him how much time we have left. We try to record for only about 20 minutes, so then the editing process is easier for me. But we might go over if someone's really interesting or if we know that there's a whole section we're going to cut, so we have time to use. So I'll say, hey, Ed, 5 minutes left, or hey, we're at 20 minutes, start wrapping it up. And sometimes he ignores me and sometimes he tries to wrap it up.
We cut it down to about 15 minutes, Megan does. And, sometimes people will stop and say it's not live, so they might cough or recast their answers. And so, that can add to the time. But in this interview with Peter Nerona, what ended up happening was we were probably we're at 20 minutes.
We were at 20 minutes.
After 20 minutes, we got to the question of, are you going to run for governor? And going into the interview, I didn't think he was, because he only had $119,000 in campaign cash while his opponents had millions. I didn't think he would. He had been toying with the idea, but I was going to ask him, but it wasn't the first question I asked. And so I said, hey, you don't have much money, so you think you're going to run? And he really pushed back hard and said, oh yeah, I could I could turn the lights on. I'll turn them on quickly. I'll raise tons of cash. I can compete. And he criticized the governor, which he usually does, but also Helena Folks, who's also a candidate. And so he sounded like a candidate, and people who listened to the podcast later said, oh wow, I think the Attorney General is going to run. Now, he didn't end up running, but that ended up being the story, the lead that came out of it. And so we do that right away.
Yeah. So those were just some more questions. This is just an example of what I'm doing in the background while he's asking the question. This is the editing software that I use, where there's a track for each voice. So while Ed's doing that, I'm recording this track. But what is more important is here, which is we don't write the intro to the podcast until after the conversation is over.
Yep.
Because in this case, we didn't know that the lead would be that Peter Nerona is sounding like he might run for governor. So after the guest leaves, we write the intro and record it separately from the guest, because then we can figure out how to shape what the headline is.
Yeah, Megan will write that introduction as soon as the guest is out in the hallway. It will say, well, what do we get out of that? What's the lead? And we do it right away. So it's very streamlined. When we first started this process, there was a lot more to it. We came back into the studio multiple times. We that prep doc got worked on over the weekends and things, but we've streamlined it now where we can do it pretty quickly. And so we're able to it's not going to suck up too much time in the course of a week.
Yeah. So we do the interview, depending on how much someone talks, they're out of the studio after about a half hour. Then we sit back down and we immediately record this intro. We write it together and the outro. And then I have everything I need to put the podcast together.
So here's the story we ended up running to preview the Peter Nerona podcast.
Yeah, let's see. That's a few. Let's see. That's what that looked like.
Yeah. Is Nerona running for governor? So that's what came out of that.
And so Ed, while I'm editing the audio, is writing a quick article that can help promote the conversation that we had and create more content for the website. But what I do after that audio has been recorded, I'll just go back to those slides, is I first put it into a software called Descript. And what Descript does is it not only transcribes all of the audio, but it allows me to do edits in the actual transcription. So this saves me so much time. I can insert extra audio. So you'll see I have Ed giving that intro, even though we recorded that before, later after the interview. I can upload that. I can put that in. So I do all of my rough cuts in this software. I don't use the AI tools that they offer. You can use it to cut out filler words, ums and uhs, and some people feel comfortable just clicking that button and letting AI do all the work. In my experience, Descript isn't exactly smooth when it makes that cut. So you can hear it, you can hear a little clip, and because I'm a professional, I cannot handle that. And then it takes me too long to fix it when they've edited it.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I just put it in here to do the rough cuts, the rearranging of the tape, the putting the intro and the break and the outro all in the right place. And then once I have it where I want it, I put it back into that Hindenburg software, which I use to record it. And this is what the final edit looks like. So you'll see that the levels have been adjusted. They go down when Peter Nerona is talking and Ed is just sitting there, so we have less of the room tone there. And you'll see in the middle, that's where we have a little break and a tiny little music to say, hey, we'll be back after a quick break because we have an ad break. And on either side is the intro and the outro and the theme music that's underneath there. And if you haven't done any audio editing before, this might look a little intimidating, but it really isn't that hard at all. And there's some nice tools in Hindenburg and other software that you can check out too. So in Hindenburg, you can go to a track and you can click something called noise reduction. And if you just click that, it's a great filter that can take out some of the room tone if you're not using a soundproof studio, which ours is just a conference room with microphones. There's also a tool called Magic Levels, and you can highlight each track and it will automatically sort of guess what the levels should be like. So you don't have to do it all yourself. It's not always right, but it's usually a good start. So that's what I'm doing in the background while Ed is writing that article. Once I've gotten it to a place where it feels done, I transcribe it again. So we reflect all those edits that I've made. And then I highlight the sections that I think would be good for social media. So our social media expert can clip that and use it for social posts. Then I send a draft and a draft description to our editor, ask her to approve it or rewrite sections. And then I upload it using Art19, which is the platform that we use to distribute the podcast. So I upload the file, put in the description, I schedule it. We release it for Thursday at 5 a.m. so people get it during their commute time. And then it goes out to all the podcast platforms and we're done. And that's what the final version looked like for Peter Nerona. That little green line is where I inserted an ad. It lets you insert a place for ads to fill. And then it gets embedded into that article.
Story. And so the story will come out at the same time. That's behind a paywall, but the podcast obviously is free that you can get on Spotify or wherever you get your podcast.
Exactly.
In the past, we've partnered with Rhode Island PBS on the podcast. So, for example, we would have one of the reporters on to analyze Election Day results or the end of the legislative session up at the State House. And now we're partnering with Roger Williams University. So, for example, we had two professors who came in to the studio from the Roger Williams University School of Law to discuss, and they ended up debating whether it's legal to send National Guard troops into cities like LA and Chicago and Portland. And going forward, we're opening to partnering with other organizations, and we always maintain editorial control in those arrangements, but they've worked out well in helping to provide some context and expert analysis to whatever we're reporting on the news of the day.
Yeah, and it's great to draw on our local experts to weigh in on some of these news events. It really does add a lot of great perspective. So we've had these folks come in to talk about sending troops to U.S. cities. We also had someone come in to talk about offshore wind, an engineer who knew a lot about the process for permitting and also just the process for building offshore wind. And we're going to be doing a piece on their work doing some aquaculture
Yeah,
work.
and we had a public health professor come in, and
Right.
it was the morning that the news broke about what RFK Jr. was saying about what the Trump administration was saying about Tylenol and autism. So that was the first question right off the top.
Yeah, and our most recent episode was an interview with someone who works for the Rhode Island Deportation Defense Network, people that are pushing back against ICE. So we really do try to stay on the news and stay on work and interesting people that are doing things in the Ocean State. Here's an example of in the field.
Oh yeah, sometimes we go out into the field and literally run after this guy, Mark Sheeran, ran every street in the city of Providence, starting from the same place up at the Planet Fitness on the north end of the city. So Megan ran alongside of him with a shotgun mic, right?
Yeah.
Pack, and I ran like 10 miles with him. We got to work.
I didn't run the full 10
day.
miles for the recording, but
yeah. But that got us definitely out of the studio that day.
yeah, we get creative. I think if I were to do that again, I would use lav mics attached to an iPhone. But it was kind of last minute. So I was like, okay, let's do this. I had a little fanny pack and I had my mic and we had a lot of wind noise, but we figured out how to.
But you could hear
it
him huffing and puffing, and
Yeah.
it was good. You get the sound. So we don't always do that, but it's always I feel like those are popular episodes when we get out there.
Yeah, and I'm able to lean on the work that I did when I was a public radio reporter, where we did do a lot of work in the field. So I have my portable equipment and we mix all sorts of audio. So those are more time intensive. We don't do them all the time, but they are fun.
So once the podcast is ready, a Globe editor will listen to it and make suggestions, and they'll edit the story I write, previewing the podcast. And sometimes, as Megan mentioned, we take videos of the podcast, and we have some talented people on the social media team who produce some short promos for TikTok and Instagram. But the main takeaway that I wanted to leave you with today is, this isn't some Hollywood production. You can do it too. It requires a bit of investment, but not a ton of money. It requires some time, and effort, but it doesn't suck up days of the week. You're still able to cover your beat, and it's not in addition to covering the news. It's part of covering the news.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because often we'll break news on the podcast. So then that feeds into all of the other work that Ed is doing. And we really try to have them be connected. It's just not this kind of thing that's floating in the ether. It's part of the coverage that Ed is doing. And sometimes we'll have a plan for an interview and Ed will call me and say, oh, we got to scrap all that. We got to bring somebody else in because this is the person who's doing something interesting. We got to hear from them. And so being flexible is really important too, to say, okay, no, we're a news organization. So we might have some things that we can, release in a few weeks and then jump on something that is more pertinent to right now. And that's really fun.
And there are other podcasts that take longer to produce that are multi-part series, and those are great. I just, I was at a conference recently, we're talking about this podcast, and a lot of people came up afterward because it's something you can do. It's doable. This is a step on the ladder that you can reach. So I guess we're going to stop there and see what questions you have.
A lot of people joining us today are starting from scratch, and they don't have any equipment, they don't have the software. And I know you talked about the software you use, but can you spend a few minutes talking about the equipment? Like, what does it take to set up your studio in whatever form that studio takes? What is the essential equipment and what are the costs associated with that equipment?
Or you can get this potted plant at IKEA.
Including the plant.
Yeah, I mean, so we can go back to look at our studio. We're really fortunate because this is a room that is in our co-working space. So this podcast space was created by the CIC, and anyone who's in this room can use it. So we didn't have to buy any of the equipment ourselves. I did kind of buy a version of this setup for myself. I bought different mics, but I think in total, I bought 3 mics, the Scarlett and the cords. I think it was about $1,500 for all of it, which is money, but not crazy money. If you want to start out, and you have no budget at all, your iPhone actually sounds pretty good if you put it close enough to your mouth. So you could even record yourself for a podcast using just the voice memo app. And you want it very close to your mouth as if it were a microphone, but that audio quality is really pretty good. And I recommend that anyone who is doing a interview over Zoom or over someone it's a remote interview, to have the person you're interviewing record themselves with a smartphone and send you that file, because that audio is much, much better than what you get over Zoom.
Yeah,
So
we
some
did
of those
that a lot during COVID when we were doing podcasts. A lot of the interviews were over Zoom, so we'd have people record on their phones and then send us the audio.
And sometimes people use other platforms like Riverside that are designed to record the audio remotely. And that's something that you can do, and some people do. But my experience is when you're interviewing someone who's not used to being interviewed or doesn't want to download additional software, it's a lot easier to just interview them over Zoom and ask them to record themselves with a phone and send it to you. It's just, just kind of less sort of fuss. But everyone will figure out what their own methods are and what makes the most sense for you. Maybe you do want to invest in Riverside or one of those other platforms, and then just kind of, teach the person you're interviewing like how to get that set up. But so it could be as cheap as nothing, just recording yourself with an iPhone. And then Hindenburg, the software I use, you can rent it for $12 a month, and you can also get a free 30-day trial so you can test it out. I recommend Hindenburg because it's designed for podcasters. It has the tools you need, but it doesn't have anything extra. So when I first started in public radio, I used Pro Tools, which was really too much. Pro Tools is designed for musicians, so it has so many options. It's just kind of overkill. Whereas Hindenburg is what I use with my students because it's easy to learn, but it is a little more advanced than some of the freer versions out there. So that's what I prefer. And, $12 a month isn't too bad. I'm trying to remember what my Descript account costs, because there are different levels. But if you don't want to use Descript, there are also other platforms you can use, like Otter.ai, which is also a transcription software, but it won't let you edit in the audio. Hindenburg has its own option to transcribe and edit in the transcription, which I haven't played around with yet. So you could even streamline it even more and just pay for Hindenburg and use that transcription option. If you don't want to mess with that at all, you can just edit in Hindenburg. But transcription really does save so much time, because you can quickly search for what you want, what you don't want, and cut it out.
Good. So it is helpful. Thank you. And actually, I should remind everyone joining us today, we have a lesson on audio reporting ready to go. Go to our 30-minute skills page, check that out, and you have a lot of good tips there, particularly how to use an iPhone if you're working with exclusively with an iPhone for equipment and no other microphones. I wanted to talk a little bit about the time element here. Ed, maybe you can speak to just how you carve out the time for this podcast in addition to all of your reporting responsibilities. We have a lot of people joining us today that maybe work for small newsrooms that are already inundated with deadlines, short on time. How do you make it all work?
Well, yeah, as I emphasize, this is part of my reporting every week. This is the podcasts that do best are tied to the news, and if I'm planning to cover something this week, that's a good candidate for the podcast, and it provides a good forum to go in depth. You've got a newsmaker for 20 minutes. So if there's something in the news that week that you're going to cover anyway, we try to get them in the door, and we don't, we're not producing episodes months in advance. We're responding to what's in the news every week. And usually taping on today's Monday morning. This is prime time for interviewing someone for the podcast that's going to drop Thursday morning. And it's not, as I said, not every episode is tied to breaking news, but the ones that do the best usually are. And so this is part of my reporting every week. We've streamlined it to the point where it's not going to eat up days and days now. It had been kind of a multi-day process when it first started, but now we've got it down where this takes about as much time as it would for me to write a regular story. And like with the Tylenol, that was breaking news that morning, and we had a guest coming in, and it was a perfect time to talk to a public health expert about that. And so it's a great tool. People like coming into the podcast studio, coming to this building. We're here at the CIC building, downtown Providence, and you have a kind of a one-on-one with newsmakers on a regular basis that is very beneficial.
Yeah, I would say it's similar to just Ed calling a source and interviewing them for a story, because the source is in and out in about a half hour.
Yep.
So it's very quick. And then we can record the intro and the outro in, 5 minutes, depending on how long we take to write it. So we're done in less than an hour, unless we sit around and chat and talk about other stuff.
Yeah, it's just another great way to tell a story. Some of the things that are on the podcast you probably wouldn't include in the print version, but a lot of it is, and you write it the same way, and so but you can hear things like I just remember once asking Mayor Larza if he was going to support Governor McKee, who he was at odds with, and he laughed so long at that question that it became kind of our teaser for social media of this extra long laugh. And so you can't really convey that as much in print as you could with the audio. So it's a great way to tell a story.
And I think they like to use the podcast to break news sometimes, or because we're having this conversation, they're a little more relaxed. Sometimes they let some things slide, or you hear about like a new thing to cover because you're having this time with them.
And reporters know this from just regular interviews. There's a lot of times the best stuff we get is after we say, all right, thanks for coming in. And then we talk some more, and they're relaxed, and they start and then we say, well, that was interesting. Wait a minute.
Let's turn the
mics back on and get that. And that's sometimes the lead of the story and the podcast. So
yeah, that's something I forgot to say. I'm also, during the interview, listening, because Ed is focused on his questions and the guest, and there's a lot to juggle. So while I'm recording, I'm also listening to see, is there something missing from the narrative arc, or is there an interesting thing that we should ask them to kind of complete the story to make all the audio hang together? So after Ed says thank you, he might say, Megan, do you have any other questions to ask? And I'll ask Ed to ask a few more questions. And by then the person is really loosened up because they feel like the podcast is over. So often that's also better audio too, because they feel like, okay, I did my performance. These are just a few little nitpicky questions from the producer. And then Ed might think of a new question too from whatever that question was.
Yeah, you got to respond to whatever they're saying. If they hit on something you didn't see coming, you got to follow that, just like you would do in any interview.
Right. So we're down to like another minute or two, and I've got two more questions I want to get to quickly. The first one, a more technical one for you, Megan. When should we be using Descript versus Hindenburg?
I mean, that's a choice for you. Some people just use Descript. You can do all of the editing you need to in Descript. It's just a little fiddly. So I like to do the final polish in Hindenburg. And it's easier for me to kind of like add the music and do the fades. But if you spend enough time with Descript, you can actually upload music and do fades. There's a timeline at the bottom where you can kind of see the audio, and you can add in another track with the sound. Most audio producers I talk to use the workflow that I use, which is big edits in Descript and fine tuning in either Pro Tools or Hindenburg or Adobe Audition, whatever you prefer to kind of do that, fine tune editing.
Great. Thank you. And last question before we wrap up, just quickly in like 30 seconds or so, how do you get your guests to agree to join your podcast? It must be a challenge getting interviews on a day-to-day basis. And now you've got the added challenge of getting them actually in the studio on your podcast. How do you get them in the room?
Well, I'd say for the most part, people are eager to do it and agree to do it. They like doing this, and not all of them. Some of the candidates don't, but it does take a little more planning. But it's not a huge ask. It's like, hey, can you come down to we're in Providence, and just sit down for 15-20 minutes and talk to us about what I was going to talk to you about anyway. So. It takes a little bit more planning, a little bit more scheduling, but you don't want, again, you don't want to do it too far in advance.
Great. Well, thank you again, Meg and Ned. Really appreciate all your time and all this guidance. And a big thank you to everyone who joined us today. We provide these lessons as a public service to you. So please return the favor and encourage your colleagues and friends to join us each month. We have a lot to learn from each other, and I look forward to seeing you all again soon. On behalf of NEFAC, thank you for all you do, and we'll see you next month for our next 30-minute skills. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.